Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. It's a 125 scale kit from AMT, number 6278. It's in 1/25th scale, and the kit was released numerous times, and this particular version was the 1990 release. Now it can be built one of two ways, either stock or a street racer, and no longer in production. It can still be found at the online markets or in hobby shops near you. Now the skill rating is about a level 2, an intermediate skill level kit, and it has 85 parts molded in white, chrome, clear, and clear red, including some vinyl tires and metal axles. Now the decals were sparse, but they included 3 colors for the tail stripe. The overall dimensions when done are about 8.5 inches long, 3 inches wide, and 2.5 inches high. Here are the contents of the kit, and as you can see, the chrome parts are individually bagged, and the pieces themselves, well, they come from old molding technology, and they'll have some flash and parting lines you'll have to deal with. For the most part, we'll be using liquid cement for construction, sometimes some super glue for fragile parts, or white glue or crystal clear for the window type parts. And please remember to follow the manufacturer's use and safety guidelines for any of the products that you see or hear mentioned in the review. Here are the decals for the kit, and as we mentioned, there's 3 different color stripes, so you should be able to match just about any color scheme you want to use to paint your model. Now, I suggest for these large color stripes that you definitely use some of the aftermarket setting solutions to help them conform to the contours of the body. Grab these pieces to assemble the massive Hemi engine, and as you can see, there are some chrome pieces there with the blower, etc., and it's nicely molded. But assemble the block and the heads and the intake, and then we're going to paint the motor Hemi orange with a steel transmission, and then continue and add the motor front and the engine front shield, and all of that, of course, is orange. Now the belt is flat black with aluminum pulleys. So assemble, and then once that's dry, and then install the supercharger, the carbs, and the air filters, and add the belt in place and the valve covers. Now add the exhaust manifolds. They're not pictured here, but they're steel colored. Next up, we'll assemble the interior and the chassis parts, the seats, the dash, radiator, steering wheel, firewall, and exhaust, and paint everything flat black. The exhaust can then be covered with a metallized steel coating covered paint to give it some authenticity. Now please remember that if you're going to glue parts together, you need to remove paint or chrome plating in order for the glue to adhere and bond to the plastic. Now we're going to install the seats and the console and the armrest, and those are painted black. And then you can detail paint the dash with some silver trim, and add the shifter, and install the dash and the steering wheel. And a tachometer is then added to the dash top. I opted to make the street racer version of the kit, and I noticed that the tires for the stock version are pretty thin, and then the race tires for the rear are pretty wide, so keep that in mind when you're assembling those. So I put together the wide rears with the wide rims, and then you can either pick the stock or custom rims as well. Install the pins in the front rim backs, and then paint the rims flat black. Those are on the back side. And then add the rims into place, and then glue the rim backs into position against the fronts. Now I gave the tires a used, worn look by pressing and rolling them on a sheet of 220 sandpaper that's nice and flat to give the tread a used and worn look for authenticity. I found after mocking up the parts that the rear hubs on the inner rims for the rear tires are too long. You need to cut those about in half. So trim those up and file that edge smooth. You'll also find that the axle's too long. So go ahead and mount one of the axles on one of the wheel hubs that you've modified, and then put it through, and then see how much you'll need to remove of the axle there with a file or a Dremel tool in order to make the tires fit flush, and then to the axles and body. Now go ahead and install the axle into place and press the other wheel hub into position. The front tires are similar to the rears for construction, except that of course they have the axle pins in there. So put a dab of glue on the end and put those into the chassis in the receiving holes and mount those front tires. And then also note that you can add the exhaust at this time, and then the chassis is complete. When I glued the nose panel of the Daytona version onto the nose here, I realized that it's a pretty loose fit and needs to be filed smooth and then filled and sanded and trimmed up so that it looks nice. File or cut the trim pieces on the sides of the lower front panel there to fill and straighten the fenders to look correct on the front of the nose. You can see the untrimmed piece laying there, and then the trimmed piece on the fender as shown. Now super glue the nose into position and fill the gap and sand smooth the seam there. Continue until you get the right look. You can use the box art and online references for its fit. Now assemble the wing with some slow setting glue and install that to the rear of the body, and make any adjustments you need to make sure that it all lines up and looks proper. With the body assembled and the nose and the wing in place, now you can wet sand the entire body with a fine grit sandpaper, at least 800 grit, and then primer that with a good quality primer inside and out. Now wet sand it again and paint a base coat on the car. I used a silver base for my car, and once the silver was cured, I came back and then added the copper color finish color coat and covered the entire car with the overall paint. Once the body is dry, you can install those decals. Put them on and start them with plenty of warm water, and then finish up with some of the decal setting solutions. Make sure you squeeze out any trapped air or water to give it a nice flat look. Now get the window glass out of the kit, and I always dip mine in some of that future floor polish, wick off the excess and let it dry. It gives it a nice thin crisp look. And then install those into the cab using some white glue or crystal clear. And then we're going to locate the interior into position, mock up that fit, and scrape off any place where you need to glue them together, and use some strong glue there, maybe even some epoxy, to make sure that the interior stays in place. Remember to scrape off the plating where you're going to install the rear bumper, and then add the rear tail lights into position, and then the rear bumper into place too. Grab the engine and then do a test fit to locate it into the chassis. Scrape off any paint that needs to be removed there and glue the engine into position. Next, slide the body onto the chassis, and wherever it meets its mounting points there, glue the chassis to the body. It should go on fairly easily, and once the hood is in place, you should see the engine pop through with those great looking air cleaners, and that completes the build of the car. Well, there you have it. Who didn't love those high wing Mopars from the 69-70 racing era? Now, this kit is fairly simple kit. It's not what you're going to call a contest winner, but you could also, add some window trim with foil and the script as well, and make it a real outstanding display for your shelf. Overall, it's got a great look, and once that wing's in place, this makes it a real head turner. So if I were you, I'd go ahead and find one and buy it and put it on my shelf. I hope you like this step-by-step premium scale model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you can find us on Facebook and at rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!